Picture this: 500 people screaming at once, nailed to wooden beams, positioned in whatever configuration amused the soldiers that morning. Some hanging upside down like slaughtered livestock, others twisted at angles that made spectators vomit. The soldiers joked while they worked, placing bets on which victim would last longest, experimenting with nail placement like artists trying new techniques. This wasn't a nightmare or some torture dungeon hidden in darkness. This was Jerusalem, 70 CE, in broad daylight, and it happened every single day for months. The smell alone would make you collapse, a mixture of excrement, blood, and rotting flesh so thick it clung to your clothes. And the Romans? They called it keeping order. Welcome to the most systematic campaign of cruelty the ancient world had ever witnessed, where an entire civilization was methodically erased through methods so disturbing that ancient historians struggled to describe them without breaking down. The Triumph Parade of 71 CE through Rome's streets was designed as theater, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. Jewish prisoners shuffled in chains, their feet bleeding from walking hundreds of miles on shredded sandals. The crowd didn't just watch. They threw things, rotting vegetables and human waste, screaming insults at people who'd committed no crime except living in the wrong city. Children were torn from mothers and displayed separately, a deliberate touch of cruelty to maximize the emotional impact. The Romans paraded the golden artifacts from the temple, a menorah and sacred vessels, items that represented everything holy to these captives, now reduced to war trophies for pagan crowds to gawk at. But here's the truly sick part. This wasn't anger or rage driving the spectacle. It was calculated policy, approved at the highest levels of government, designed to send a message so terrifying that no province would dare resist Rome again. Every humiliation was planned, every degradation intentional. The Romans had turned suffering into statcraft. When Titus surrounded Jerusalem in April 70 CE, he chose his timing with malicious precision. Passover, when the city swelled with pilgrims, when families gathered for sacred meals and celebrations. The Romans sealed every exit 3 days before the festival, trapping not just residents, but thousands of visitors who traveled from across Judea to worship. Imagine explaining to your children why they couldn't leave, why the celebration of freedom from Egyptian slavery was happening while Roman siege engines assembled outside the walls. Inside the city, 3 rival Jewish factions had been fighting each other, actually burning food supplies to deny them to competitors. The stupidity of it is almost unbearable, but that's what desperation does. When the Romans appeared, these groups finally united, but by then they'd destroyed enough grain to feed the city for years. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so utterly tragic. The Jews essentially starved themselves before Rome threw a single stone. The siege unfolded with the efficiency of a slaughterhouse operation. Roman engineers built earthworks like they were constructing monuments, massive ramps of timber and stone that crept closer to the walls daily. Each defensive layer that fell brought systematic executions. The Romans didn't just kill soldiers. They crucified anyone caught trying to escape, including elderly men who could barely walk and women clutching infants. Josephus, who witnessed this carnage firsthand, described scenes that sound like they're from horror fiction, but were documented reality. People eating leather belts boiled until soft. Families fighting over handfuls of grass. And then there's the story that makes even hardened historians uncomfortable. The woman so insane with hunger that she killed, cooked, and partially consumed her own baby before neighbors discovered what she'd done. The Romans heard about this incident and apparently found it amusing, proof that Jews were savages who deserved conquest. That's the level of twisted logic operating here, using the suffering they caused as justification for causing more suffering. By July, Roman forces breached the Antonia fortress, and what happened next was cultural annihilation on a scale rarely matched in history. The Second Temple, center of Jewish religious life, burned on August 30th. Now, there's debate about whether Titus ordered its destruction or soldiers acted against orders. Frankly, it doesn't matter. The result was identical. Jewish defenders threw themselves into the flames, trying to save sacred objects, burning alive rather than watch their holiest site destroyed. Roman soldiers either ignored commands to preserve the building or deliberately disobeyed them. And in the chaos of massacre, who's checking? The temple contained the accumulated wealth and religious artifacts of centuries. Gold melted and ran between stone blocks. Sacred scrolls turned to ash. The massive bronze doors collapsed inward with sounds witnesses described as the death scream of a god. And when it was over, when only smoking ruins remained, the Romans systematically demolished every other significant structure in Jerusalem. Buildings burned, walls toppled, entire neighborhoods ground to dust. They left 3 towers standing in a section of the Western Wall, not from mercy or respect, but so future generations could see what they'd conquered. Look upon our works and despair. Even conservative estimates put casualties at hundreds of thousands. Josephus claimed over 1 million died, which historians think is exaggerated. But honestly, does it matter whether it was 500,000 or 1 million? The scale of death was so massive that exact numbers become meaningless. Jerusalem became a graveyard, and the Romans made sure everyone knew who dug the graves. The sorting process after Jerusalem fell reveals how Rome turned cruelty into administrative efficiency. They didn't just kill or enslave randomly. They categorized victims with bureaucratic precision that makes it somehow worse. Armed defenders? Executed immediately. Elderly who couldn't work? Executed. Everyone else got processed like livestock at market. Approximately 97,000 Jews were enslaved, a number that represents tens of thousands of shattered families, children who'd never see parents again, couples separated forever. Age 17 became the dividing line between destinies. Anyone younger was automatically sold into servitude and shipped to provinces across the empire, deliberately scattered to prevent any possibility of reunion. The strongest survivors, the ones who might have hoped their youth and health would save them, discovered they'd been selected for entertainment, the Roman kind, which meant being forced into arenas to die slowly for crowds who ate snacks while watching. This wasn't quick execution. This was prolonged torment carefully staged for maximum spectator enjoyment. The arena deaths were particularly vile because Romans treated them as theater, dressing Jewish captives in costumes representing doomed mythological heroes before killing them in ways that mimicked famous stories. Imagine being forced to wear some ridiculous outfit, paraded before thousands of screaming Romans, then torn apart by lions or burned alive, all while the crowd cheered your suffering as if it were a play. Some captives were forced to fight each other as gladiators, knowing that survival today only meant facing the same horror tomorrow. Others faced wild animals they'd never even seen before, creatures imported from Africa specifically for these spectacles. The psychological torture of waiting your turn, hearing the screams of previous victims, knowing exactly what awaited you, that might have been worse than the actual death. And the ultimate insult? Jewish captives were assigned to construction projects, building the monuments of their own defeat. They provided forced labor for the Forum of Peace, and most grotesquely, for the Colosseum itself, where their fellow prisoners would later die for public entertainment. They literally built the arena where Jews would be slaughtered, cementing their own tomb. The rebel leaders' fates demonstrate how Rome could make death itself a punishment. Simon Bar Giora survived the siege only to be dragged to Rome in chains for the triumph. Parade of 71 CE. He was displayed like a circus animal, pelted with garbage, humiliated before crowds who'd never met him but hated him on principle. Then came the Mamertine prison, an underground cell so foul that prisoners could smell it before seeing it, where he was executed by hanging. Not quickly, though. Roman hangings were designed to maximize suffering, slow strangulation, while crowds watched. John of Giscala got something arguably worse: life imprisonment. He spent decades locked away, his life extended specifically so he could suffer longer, denied both freedom and the dignity of dying on his own terms. The cruelty was the point. Rome wanted rebel leaders to serve as permanent warnings, alive or dead, examples of what happened when you challenged the empire. But crucifixion, that's where Roman creativity and torture truly shined. The numbers alone are incomprehensible. 500 people crucified daily at peak periods, the executions continuing for months. Do the math. That's 15,000 people in a single month, hanging from crosses visible from Jerusalem's walls, their screams audible to anyone who couldn't see them. The Romans ran out of wood. Think about that. They crucified so many people that finding trees became a logistical challenge. The landscape around Jerusalem transformed into a forest of dying bodies, crosses erected wherever space allowed, victims hanging at every angle imaginable because soldiers amused themselves experimenting with configurations. Some hung upside down, blood rushing to their heads, prolonging agony. Others had arms stretched at angles that dislocated shoulders immediately. Josephus wrote that soldiers treated these executions as entertainment, betting on survival times, joking about victim responses to different nail placements. The process itself was engineered for maximum suffering. First came scourging, whips embedded with metal fragments or bone shards that shredded flesh from backs, exposing muscle and sometimes even bone. Then victims carried the crossbeam to execution sites, often collapsing from blood loss and exhaustion, dragging the wood when they could no longer lift it. At the site, they were nailed through wrists and feet, the iron spikes not just securing them, but positioned to maximize pain. That 1968 archaeological discovery of a heel bone with a 7.5-inch nail still embedded tells you everything about Roman efficiency and cruelty. The nail was bent at the tip to prevent removal, a thoughtful touch that ensured the victim couldn't escape or be rescued. Death by crucifixion wasn't swift. The position made breathing difficult, forcing victims to push up on their nailed feet to inhale and collapse down when legs gave out. A cycle of agony that lasted hours or days, depending on the victim's strength. Eventually, exposure, shock, and exhaustion caused, but not before, unimaginable suffering. And all of this, every crucifixion, every execution, every act of torture, served a calculated purpose. Titus understood that each body hanging in sight of Jerusalem's walls was a message to defenders inside. The Romans hoped the display would break resistance, force surrender through psychological warfare. It didn't work, which tells you something about either Jewish determination or the defenders' understanding that surrender meant slavery, an arena death anyway. Even after Jerusalem fell, captured rebels were crucified along roads throughout Judea, their bodies left rotting for weeks as warnings to any community harboring thoughts of resistance. The cruelty continued long after military necessity ended, transitioning from war tactic to occupation policy. But Rome wasn't satisfied with mere conquest and temporary punishment. Emperor Hadrian decided to ensure Jerusalem would never again serve as a rallying point by erasing its Jewish identity entirely. He rebuilt the city as Alea Capitolina, a Roman colony whose name proclaimed its new allegiance, designing it with broad streets, arched gateways, and forums that deliberately mimicked Roman architecture. Where the temple had stood, Hadrian erected a temple to Jupiter, the ultimate insult, replacing the center of Jewish worship with a shrine to Rome's chief pagan god. Then came the formal edict. Jews were banned from entering the city. Not temporarily, not conditionally, permanently. Jews couldn't live in or even visit their holiest city. The ban was absolute, enforced by Roman authorities who viewed any Jewish presence as a security threat. The only exception was designed specifically to reinforce defeat. Once yearly, on the 9th of Av, the day the Second Temple burned, Jews were permitted to enter and mourn at the Temple Mount. This wasn't mercy. It was ritualized humiliation, forcing Jews to grieve their losses while surrounded by the pagan city that replaced Jerusalem. Jerome described these 4th-century gatherings, elderly Jewish pilgrims covered in years, and rags, weeping over ruins while Roman citizens went about their business, indifferent to the tragedy playing out in their streets. Hadrian went further, renaming the entire province from Judea to Syria Palestina, deliberately choosing a name associated with ancient Philistines, enemies of the Jews. This wasn't administrative reorganization. It was symbolic annihilation, removing even geographic nomenclature connecting the land to its Jewish inhabitants. The consequences of this renaming persist today, as Palestine derives directly from Syria Palestina. The ban on Jewish residence remained in effect for centuries, persisting through Rome's Christianization under Constantine. Only with the Muslim conquest in 636 CE did it finally end, nearly 500 years after Jews were expelled from their former capital. This systematic exclusion created a permanent diaspora mentality. For the first time in their history, Jews constituted a people without a political homeland, scattered across the Roman Empire and beyond, developing communities in Spain, North Africa, Italy, Babylonia, and Arabia. Each maintained religious traditions while adapting to local conditions, creating the dispersed Jewish identity that would persist for 18 centuries until modern Israel's establishment in 1948. Rome succeeded in its immediate military objectives, destroying Jerusalem, enslaving the population, executing rebels with spectacular cruelty. But ultimately, they failed to destroy Jewish identity itself, which persisted across centuries of dispersion, adapting and surviving in ways that would have horrified Roman planners. The cruelty was extraordinary, the suffering unimaginable, but the people endured, carrying forward the culture. Rome tried to erase through methods so brutal that ancient historians struggled to record them without breaking down.